Hello and welcome to the Amateur of Life and Death podcast. I'm Liz Plumpton.
And I'm Phil Ree.
Yes, we're back for a third season of the podcast, and we've even roped in a new presenter.
Each episode takes a look at a different aspect of the wonderful world of amateur theatre and features an amateur theatre maker talking about their theatrical life, theatrical loves, and the times when they've died on stage.
This month's episode focuses on the history of the Crescent Theatre Birmingham, which is celebrating a big birthday this season. I've been talking to Clare Crosland, the Crescent's head of archives, about the rewards and challenges of archiving 100 years of amateur theatre history.
And we'll be delving into the archives to find out a bit more about the history of the Crescent Theatre Company and about past productions of the two classic shows that are opening its centenary season this month, Blithe Spirit and Pride and Prejudice. The Crescent Theatre Company's story began in Birmingham city centre in December 1923, when a few city council employees entertained their colleagues with a Christmas review of sketches and songs in the council house canteen. The review was a huge success, and the group decided to form a theatre society shortly afterwards, and so the municipal players were established in early 1924. For the next 7 years, the group continued to present plays in the canteen, but their ambitions quickly grew, and they launched a fundraising appeal to acquire their own theatre. In 1931, an opportunity presented itself when numbers 17, 18 and 19 The Crescent, Birmingham, became available to lease from the council. These premises, together with the derelict Baskerville Hall, were converted by the members, often with bare hands and hired tools, to a theatre with a raked auditorium, stage, dressing rooms and workshops. The theatre opened to the public in April 1932, and the theatre company adopted the name the Crescent Theatre Company.
The Crescent staged a diverse range of theatre throughout the 1930s, until 1939 when, at the outbreak of World War II, all theatres were closed. Restrictions were lifted in 1940, and the Crescent became Birmingham's garrison theatre, solely for the entertainment of troops and auxiliary services. The members fitted in rehearsals for productions around their daily work and civil defence duties. The ensuing years saw the Crescent create the Crescent Theatre School and a youth theatre. They also acquired adjoining buildings and were set for expansion when the council dealt a blow. The land was needed for development, and the theatre company was given notice to quit.
The council offered the Crescent a site on Cumberland Street with an interest-free loan to build a new theatre. The new theatre, the second Crescent home, was opened in October 1964. The new building quickly established itself as a vibrant arts venue in the heart of Birmingham and was in great demand from other theatre groups wishing to hire it. Through the 70s and 80s, the Crescent flourished.
However, in the late 1980s, history repeated itself as the council disposed of the ground lease, and the theatre's 1960s architecture did not fit in with the style of the planned new development. Once more, the Crescent was faced with the prospect of losing its home, but after long and delicate negotiations, the developers, Brindley Place plc, agreed to finance a new building on a canal-side site fronting onto Sheepcote Street.
The current Crescent Theatre building opened in 1998, housing a 300-seater proscenium arch main house and a 100-seater flexible studio space, along with rehearsal spaces, a bar, workshop and extensive wardrobe and scenery stores. And so the Crescent Theatre Company prepares to open its 100th season in September 2023, continuing the long tradition of producing high-quality amateur theatre in the heart of England's second city. The company will be returning to its roots this December when it performs the Christmas Wassail, a festive celebration in song and spoken word, back at the Birmingham City Council House, where it all began a century earlier.
So I'm delighted to be joined by Clare Crosland. Clare is the head of archives at the Crescent Theatre. She's been a member for about 4 years, and she also works backstage on props and sometimes helps out with set. Clare, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for thinking that the stuff I'm doing is interesting enough to talk to me about.
Absolutely. So obviously this is the beginning of the Crescent centenary season.
Yes.
And the theatre company's been around for much longer than any of us have been alive, even our oldest and longest standing members. But how did you personally get involved with the Crescent?
So, as you said, it was about 4 years ago. I had just turned 19. I'd moved here for university a few months ago. And I'd always been interested in doing theatre, but I'd never really had a chance to do it at school for various reasons. I was forced to be in the Nativity when I was very, very little, and I was very angry about it. I did not want to go on stage, but they made me. I kept saying, I want to do backstage stuff. I just want to do backstage stuff. And they kept being like, your parents want to see you on stage, and 6 is too young to be a stage manager. I don't know what that is about. But yeah, I'd always wanted to do backstage stuff, but the university societies didn't really seem right for me. But this did, so I came here.
So what were you studying at university?
I studied politics.
And that was at Birmingham?
Yes.
Okay, great. So you joined the Crescent. So 2019 was kind of the year before the pandemic.
Yes.
So did you manage to get involved with anything before the theatres all kind of shut down in 2020?
Yes, I did 3 shows. Pressure, Christmas Carol, and Hamlet. Hamlet was the last one right before things shut down. It closed, I think, a week before everything ended. So that was very lucky.
So what were you doing on those productions?
I did props on all 3 of those. Yeah.
And what is it that you like about backstage work? So that's quite a strong preference to have at such a young age. I think, there's definitely the kids who don't want to be on stage at all because they're just shy or, nervous. But to be so clear that you wanted to be involved, but you wanted to be backstage, at the age of 6 is pretty impressive, really. So what is it that you enjoy about that aspect of theatre?
So part of it is just that I don't love performing. I have performed in the past. I used to be a figure skater, so I had to perform for that. And I was in that activity. I was in one other school show, but I'd never. It's just fundamentally more interesting to me, backstage stuff, and I've kind of always felt that way. And maybe it's a little bit that I kind of like the idea of being in charge of things as well, instead of just being told what to do.
Yeah.
But
you should try directing. That's very good for people that like being in charge.
Well, it's sort of in the middle, really. I like helping facilitate other people's things, but I like in a way where I've got my own thing that I'm in control of. I don't know if being in charge is. It's a little bit intimidating right now, at least.
I suppose with props, you're in charge of a really important aspect of the show, aren't you? You have to make sure that everything is right, at first of all, and then that everything is there in the right place at the right time, doing the thing it's supposed to do.
Yeah, and that lends itself well to archives as well, because it's just all about finding ways to keep things as organised as possible, even as things change kind of all around you. Yeah.
And what is it you particularly enjoy about props? Is it the finding the right prop or making the prop, or is it being backstage running props while the show's going on?
I don't know if it's props that I specifically. I started doing props basically just because I was told that was something where help was needed, and I went, I'd like to do something helpful. I'd like to try and do some other things as well that are in other sections and stuff, but yeah, it's mostly just that I like being in charge of something, I guess, where I'm helping other people do what they need to do, and it's all collaborative, and that's very enjoyable for me.
Great. So, in preparation for the theatre's centenary season, we launched a digital archive project, or maybe just an archive project, but I suppose the nature of the world today is that the digital is the way in which we access most of our content and the way in which we tend to try and store things for posterity. And you've been very much at the forefront of that project. Tell us a bit about the archiving process.
Okay, so we started the project properly last January. There's been archiving efforts in the past. I'm glad there was, because if I'd had to start truly from scratch, I don't know how I would have. But we started the digitizing process in January, and for the first 5 months that has just been manually typing out all the show names and dates and the names of actors and stuff into essentially a database that we've created. That took. I started working on it on January 20th and finished on May 25th. there are reasons I remember those dates. I'm not quite that obsessive. But that's how long it took to get all those names in. And so now we've got a searchable database of every actor, every behind the scenes person, every show that has been done that we have records of, which is great.
So that's about 99 years, or
yeah, about that. Yeah, it kind of give or take because a lot of the early stuff is missing. But and also actually some more recent stuff is missing as well, because there have been times where archiving kind of lapsed. But so I'm working on chasing that up now. That's one of the things I'm working on, and I'm also working on. We're trying to get photos in, because that's sort of the next step. So it'll be ready to be publicly available. And we've got a big physical archive cabinet that is completely unorganized, that I'm trying to work out a system for organizing. It's a challenge.
So in terms of those very early days, when the theatre company that was then the Municipal Players,
yes,
not before it became the Crescent Theatre Company, started, initially they didn't have a home, if I'm correct. So
yes.
Are those the years that tend to be missing in terms of just we don't have programmes or playbills? Or
Yes, there's very little from pre-1932, which is when it becomes the Crescent. When it's the Municipal Players, there's a few things from that time, or there's some replicas of things from that time, interestingly, but there's not very much available. There's certainly nothing from the very first show, which wouldn't have had a programme at all, because it was not a proper theatre production. It was city council employees just doing a show for their colleagues.
Yeah.
So we don't know much about that show at all, unfortunately. But that would have been the first one in 1923, which is why we're counting from.
So 1932, was that when they moved into Baskerville House, Baskerville Hall?
Yes, it was that, and a few other. I think it was a few different kind of street places that were all taken to.
Yeah,
that's my understanding. Yeah, but yeah,
so
1932.
That's a pretty big job just to get all of that information into a database.
Yes.
Did you find it daunting?
I suppose yes, in terms of kind of, if you see it all laid out in front of you physically, it's just a lot of just stacks and stacks of paper. 4 times as tall as me, probably, if you could stack them. But you kind of just take it in small chunks at a time and just sit. I would sit and work for somewhere between 3 to 6 hours at a time. I would come in and work on it usually, and there were other people working on it as well. I absolutely should say. I did the most, mostly just because my schedule allowed it this year.
Yeah.
But yeah, other people have worked on it as well, and I'm very grateful to that. Yeah.
So you mentioned that the next stage is to get pictures added to the archive. What's the process for that, particularly for the pre-digital photograph era?
So that is just going to be, it's just scanning. It's just scanning a lot of these photos. We've got, for the most recent ones, we've got them all saved, thankfully, so it's just a matter of copy and pasting. But for anything, honestly, kind of pre-2010s even, it's mostly just what was printed out, and then I'm going to have to scan it, and other people are going to have to scan it. I'm going to have people helping me, hopefully. Just scanning and uploading into these massive files.
Yeah. So 2010 must have been around the time when our current theatre photographer started working with us, Graham, who's also a member. So before that, there were digital photographs. I was a member before that, but possibly not stored digitally in the same way as since then. And so I don't know if there are, obviously, how many photos there are for some of the older productions, but are you scanning everything, or is there an editorial process where you decide what makes the cut? There's so many pictures per show.
So that is an interesting one, because I my plan, I'm going to scan everything. Everything is going to be in the archive, because that's to me that's the point of having an archive, is to have everything there. However, because this is an existing business, there are certain photos that cannot be publicly available, because one of the things, I want to be very careful how I phrase this. Obviously this has been around for 100 years, and when you look at the history of all of it, it very much feels like a microcosm of 100 years of British history almost.
Yeah, social history.
And very much it's cultural history, and that is it's very fascinating to see how we've been quite ahead in some ways. We'd be very good about gay men's history, actually, and representing gay men in plays. Maybe unsurprising for theatre, but that's something we've been really, really good on. I've been really impressed with. But there are other ways where we have not been ahead of the kind of maybe contemporary social aspects, and so there are definitely photos of things that would not align with the moral values anyone here holds now.
So I suppose it's important.
Can I say what
Yeah, it's important to record those. I assume you're talking about things such as blackface.
Yes,
which was relatively common for a surprisingly long time into the 20th century, I would say, and in my experience with other amateur groups as well, not only this one. Yes,
there are photos of that and similar things, and also not in terms of the photos, but in just terms of records, we've got some quite astonishingly sexist stuff as well.
Yeah.
And that, because it's been determined that really can't be made available publicly because of how it could be misinterpreted, why we are keeping it available. But my plan is for there to be some acknowledgement that yes, these do exist, and if you are an academic who wants to see them for some reason, you could contact me and we'll figure out a way for you to see it. But I think I agree that it's not necessarily appropriate to have it publicly available, but I think it absolutely has to be acknowledged as part of the history.
Yeah, I think as soon as you put something on the internet, there's a danger of it being taken without any context.
Exactly.
In essence, and the kind of, the kind of nuance you'd want to put on it isn't always possible if it just becomes a searchable Google image that, you wouldn't necessarily, as you say, wouldn't necessarily want to be associated with in a kind of without any background as to, it's one of those things. I suppose it's like lots of things in history, they happened, we don't have to celebrate them, it's probably helpful to record them.
Yes. And I want to be really clear, I don't want anything to be made light of it, I guess, because I think this is real. Going to bring up my politics degree here. I think this is real kind of temptation with looking at that sort of thing, to look at it and say, well, they could do it then because it was okay then, because it was a different time and it was okay then and it wasn't offensive then. And that is just not true. It's not that things become offensive, it's that we learn that as a kind of wider society, we are told that they are, because the people who are targeted by this sort of thing are able to say so when they mostly weren't before, or if they were saying so, weren't listened to. And I don't want anyone kind of looking at this stuff and thinking, well, we're not taking it seriously because we're just thinking, oh, it was okay back then, because it wasn't. It was never okay. And I want that acknowledged. I think it's really important to take that attitude to it and not take it lightly.
It's treading that line, isn't it? It's not about excusing it or celebrating it, but equally it is fact that it happened. And I suppose that is part of a social and cultural history.
Absolutely.
And if we're being optimistic, maybe an evolution, and some things slowly getting better. We hope.
Yeah.
So, on a slightly lighter note,
yes.
Have there been anything that's been particularly interesting or unusual that you've come across in the archive?
Yes, I I brought a few things actually. Some of the most interesting stuff is unfortunately not the best for this medium because it's visual. It's these gorgeous set designs and costume designs and photographs and stuff. But obviously doesn't really work for audio. So I brought some stuff that had some interesting text. So the first thing I've got is a membership card from the 1940s. I don't know.
It's probably about an A6 green sort of cardboard little booklet, sort of passport size.
It's got an amendment in it from 1948, so I think the actual booklet must be a little bit older than that, maybe 1947. It's what the membership cards looked like in the post-war period.
What did you get in your membership card in the late 1940s?
It's mostly just rules. I brought it because there's one rule that always makes me laugh. And under the Rules of Theatre Management as adopted by the Management Committee in 1946, we've got rule number 16, which is staff teas or other refreshments provided at the expense of the theatre shall be available only to the members of staff actually engaged in the production.
They probably still had rationing in 1946, though. Well, they did. So you can see that as a bit of that coming through. Although I'm sure people have been moaning about people misusing tea and coffee for ever.
That's why it made me laugh. I love, but I love that, especially because it's quite late down the list, which suggests it may be a later rule because it was a problem.
How many rules are there?
There are 23 rules of theatre management, and these ones, that's one of the general rules. Most of the other ones are sort of fairly standard, so you can have a look if you like.
Let's have a look. During a production, male members of the cast and staff shall not enter the women's dressing rooms or vice versa. No animals shall be brought into the theatre. Yeah. It's actually, some of these are just like the same things that we still... we still, as a member of the board of this theatre, I have to say some of these things are things we still talk about now.
That's one of the things that really strikes me about it. There's so much stuff that is just, it's 100 years old or 80 years old or whatever, but it's the same stuff that we deal with now.
Yeah.
I love that.
This is wonderful. Oh, one of them's been rescinded. It's got rescinded drawn through it, number 12, and then it's been renumbered underneath. Amendment of the rules at the 18th Annual General Meeting of the Crescent Theatre Players. It was resolved that rules 8 and 12 be rescinded. This is a lovely thing. What else have you got?
So we've got so many programmes, but this is one that again just had something in it that made me laugh. It's from 1945. It's for a production of a show called The Government Inspector, which I think we did again at some point, but I'd have to check.
Probably done it a few times. Yeah.
So back then there would always be these. There'd be a page of sort of a letter from, I think usually the theatre chairman or sometimes someone else on the board of the theatre, who would do just a message to audience members. Usually quite personable, I think. Possibly it was a much smaller community coming to see these shows back then, and so maybe they really did all know each other. But this one has a postscript on it that I really enjoy. This is from, it's by Norman Leaker, the first chairman. It says, P.S. I am asked to say that talkative latecomers to the performances and early leavers, particularly those who crash out by the wrong lower door, are to be deprecated. Or was it decapitated? And then, I don't have it to hand, but the following programme includes another postscript where he mentions that at performances of The Government Inspector, there were very few talkative latecomers or early leavers, and that was appreciated. So
by early leavers, do they mean people leaving before the play finished?
I assume so, yes.
I thought the form was generally to sneak out if you were doing that, not really loads of noise.
Yeah. Well, clearly this. I think we should be threatening to go full Henry VIII on on rude audience members. It clearly works. And then the other thing I've got is from much more recently. It's from the 1992, where it was a little document put together by the backstage team, which I'll show you. asking for help with the strike, and I just enjoy the way it's all phrased. They put together this fake newspaper.
There's a couple of A4 pieces of paper, and it's called the Backstage Bugle. Mm-hmm. So I think it's basically they need help with a strike.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty common thing to put a call out about. But they've obviously, maybe they were having trouble attracting people to help because they've kind of gone quite full on in their they think it's all over, full stop, but it's not, full stop. Apocalyptic orgy, full stop. We need your help, full stop. Get dirty, full stop. What is it? And then they've done a kind of like a mock-up. It's like a newspaper, I suppose, isn't it? But like a front page newspaper. Eurovision fiasco. Singer Michael Ball announced yesterday that he is withdrawing from the Eurovision Song Contest just 24 hours before the show. Was he actually in the 1990s? I need to check this. A tired and emotional Ball said, Crescent musicals only come around once a year. If I'd known the Eurovision contest was going to clash, I'd never have agreed to do it. It's a horrible song anyway. And then there's also references the LA riots. I'm not sure how on message this is, but the real cause of the Los Angeles riots emerged last night. Community leaders demanded tickets to the last night of the Crescent Theatre's production of Guys and Dolls in Birmingham, England.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's just so inappropriate that, despite everything I was saying earlier, it kind of does wrap around.
I know, and I mean, it goes on to kind of, kind of articulate some of the grievances that were behind those riots, but again, it's kind of interesting that they use that in this kind of quite frivolous context.
But yeah. I remember the first time I found that I was with someone else when we found it. We were just reading through it and crying, laughing. It was So well done to whoever did that.
All members of the cast are cordially invited to take part in this apocalyptic orgy of destruction. This practice for Armageddon. This strike to end all strikes. This end of the set as we know it. So I feel like our current heads of section probably missing a trick here. They're going just asking if anyone wants to come and help is probably a bit tame. They need to. Yeah.
Again, on principle, I have to say, treating the LA riots like that inappropriate, but it is very funny. The whole thing is very funny.
And now I need to check. Was Michael Ball the UK entry in the Eurovision Song Contest 1992? I suppose yes. I have learned something today.
But yeah. I mean, the overall thing though, the stuff that I love finding most is people complaining. This is all people complaining.
Yeah.
And I find lovely stuff as well. I didn't bring them because I thought it was maybe inappropriate to read them on here, but I found love letters between people who met here and have since died, and all their theatre-related stuff came to us, and so their letters got mixed in with it. And I've read them and have been like, oh, I shouldn't be reading this. So I didn't bring them. So you find really lovely stuff as well, but I love the complaining the most, partly because it makes me laugh, but also there's so much complaining, but it's by people who come back. So it's not people complaining because they're miserable or because they hate this. They're complaining because they care, and I love that.
Is that audience or members?
Members complaining.
Right. Yeah. Why am I surprised? Yeah.
There's stuff going back as far as there have been newsletters where people are complaining that members aren't doing their duties. It really is. I love that. I love complaining. I love complaining, and I can tell the difference between complaining because you hate it and complaining because you love it, and this is complaining because you love it.
I have to say, I've had a look at just a very small number of programmes from the 1930s, and the thing that I get completely mesmerised by is the adverts.
Oh yes,
they're just so of their time, and I just remember there's obviously a big push for gas. There's all this stuff about the Birmingham Gas Company, and you can kind of trace the narrative of these adverts through a few programmes where they're and people offering elocution lessons. It's just, I just love it. I'm like, never mind the play. I just want to read these adverts.
Yes. Yesterday I was looking through a magazine that of sorts that we put out in 1939. This was Municipal Players magazine, And on top, it's got a whole section listing all the things you need to consider while choosing an amateur production, which is very funny because it's all still very much applicable now, and I love that stuff. But yeah, there's a whole section where someone's advertising elocution advice. I'm reading through that and just, this is bizarre.
Yep.
Love it.
So we've touched on some of these, but what have been the challenges of digitising nearly 100 years of amateur theatre history?
So there are definitely a few different ways I can answer that. The most literal one just being that there is a lot of it, and it is physically very heavy.
Yeah.
And I am 5'1" and don't exercise quite as much as I should, other than carrying very large stacks of paper around. So that, I mean, I'm fairly strong. I wouldn't do this if I wasn't, but you have to be. That's not something people necessarily think about, but genuinely,
there's a physical aspect.
There is absolutely a physical aspect. That is something that they tell you if you're interested in going into archives, is you have to be physically strong.
Yeah.
Because it's actually a very physically demanding job. And yeah, as I say, there's just a lot of it to go through, and it can be quite overwhelming at times to look at it and go, I don't even know where to start with this. And you just have to pick one thing and just go, I'm just going to work on that. And it's, again, it's that is challenging, but it's also, it's also quite emotionally challenging at times. In order to get through all of that stuff, you have to kind of desensitize yourself to things. You know, people do come up to me and just like, I don't know how you can get through all of this. I mean, I'd just be too interested in looking through all of it. And I'm like, I am very interested in it, but I have to just tell myself I'm not, because it will never get done.
Yeah.
So
I would be terrible. I'd be like, I've spent 3 hours reading this programme from 1933.
Yeah. So I just have to turn that off and turn it all into, this is just data. This is just data that I have to enter into this spreadsheet or whatever. And I can do that, and that can, if anyone's ever spoken to me while I was working, that makes me seem a bit heartless while I'm working, but it has to be done. But ever so often you will come across something that sort of breaks you out of that. And one of the things that you're going through 100 years of stuff, you're typing this one person's name over and over and over again, and you notice one day, I haven't typed that person's name for a while, and then you open up the next program and it's a death announcement. And like intellectually, you know that this person who was active in the 1940s, 50s, and was probably already in their own kind of 40s, 50s at that point, isn't going to be alive now. Like intellectually, when I'm going through all the 50s programs and stuff, I know none of these people are alive, but it's still kind of something to be confronted with it whenever you come across, and it tells you a bit about that person, and it's sad.
Yeah.
And then also,
but it's also kind of nice, I think, that person's involvement in the theatre is being recorded in
absolutely.
a way that will be more publicly available in the future than in a programme in a filing cabinet. Not that that's not valuable, but
absolutely, yeah. I want to kind of put together something with the death announcements. We've got a few funeral programmes even from people who were very active, because I think that is, I think it's really important to preserve the legacies of these individual people as well. A lot of times, I've got kind of like little mini collections because people, when they die, their families will often pass and all of their theatre stuff back to theatre, as I was saying earlier, and it feels wrong to just sort that all out into like, oh, this is this show's program, I should just stick it with the rest of the stuff for that show. It's like, no, this was this person's program, and it just kind of feels wrong to separate it all out. So I'm kind of hoping to,
unless it fills a gap, though.
Yeah, unless it fills a gap. If it fills a gap, it's going in. But otherwise, if it doesn't, then it feels like it would be a nice thing to kind of keep together properly labelled individual collections. I think that it says something about the people who have been here. I think that's nice. And then we talked about it earlier, but then there are also the kind of challenges of coming across stuff that does not really align with what you would like to see, and that can be just kind of difficult to grapple with, especially the stuff where it's kind of. I've talked to a few people about this. It's a challenging one. Do you know a show called? Have you heard of a show called South by Julian Green?
No.
Right. So South is South is a difficult play. It was done. It was written by a playwright called Julian Green. He's French-American, in 1953, and they wanted to bring it to the UK and perform it in London in 1955, but it was banned by the Lord Chancellor because it had very, very mild, frankly, homosexual content. It wasn't able to be performed in Britain until 1959. I think my understanding is that the Wolfenden Report helped make that possible. It was actually done as an ITV Play of the Week in 1959. It was only rediscovered about 10 years ago, and it is the first known TV broadcast in Britain to deal with gay relationships at all.
We're kind of in a taste of honey territory, time-wise there, aren't we?
Yeah.
Just in terms of a British equivalent.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that's really interesting is that we did it in 1956. So that's before the ITV broadcast, that's before the Wolfenden Report, that's a year after it was banned, which is incredibly brave, I think. Incredibly brave to have done that, and incredibly admirable. However, that production is also one of the ones that has the blackface content. South refers to the American South. This play is set on the eve of the Civil War, and Julian Green was very pro-Confederacy. I found an interview with him because I was looking into this. Ever since I discovered this production on maybe my third archiving session, and it has kind of been in my brain ever since. Yeah. So I've done some research onto it, and there's an interview with Julian Green from when he was in his 90s, and his house was just full of Confederate flags and stuff. And you get the impression it's not that he was like a malicious racist. That's not why he was so pro-Confederacy, but more that he just really he wouldn't have been alive for the actual Confederacy. It was more something that was instilled in him by his parents. He lived in France. It seems less that he was, again, malicious, and more that he just didn't really care. The kind of atrocities committed against black people in the American South seem to have more escaped his notice than anything else, which is still not okay, but it's a different kind of not okay than active racism. But it means that this play, and also our production of it, because again it contains something abhorrent, is, has this great complication to it, and so it's hard to. The only way to feel about it is complicated, because it's in one way this very impressive thing, and in one way this awful thing.
So
and you have to acknowledge both.
Was that because the Crescent was a private members club that it could perform it, even though it had been banned by the Lord Chamberlain?
I don't know the specifics of it. Interestingly, the programme doesn't reference the fact that it had been banned at all. I suspect it was performed unlicensed, because I think that was the only way it could be performed. I suspect it had to do with it being...
because it was
I don't claim to be an expert on 1950s law.
I'm just wondering how they circumvented that ban, really. And is it that the production chose to use blackface, and that the actors were playing characters who should have been African American, black?
Yes, I don't know the exact...
rather than that being part of the script.
I've never seen a script for it, so I don't know if the script specifically called for it to use blackface. I don't believe the ITV production did, but it's hard to tell because it's a very old production and not a huge amount is known about it. But it doesn't look like it. It does look like it in our photos, though. It does look like it, and it's very unpleasant to look at. It's not minstrelsy. I should be very clear. It's not anything like that, but it is clearly not appropriate. It's just this very kind of complicated thing, and it's hard to know how to feel about it, because one of the things I'd like to do with all this moving forward is kind of put together some history, maybe historical displays or social media stuff about specific topics, and it'd be really great to do something about the gay history, for example, because I think in most ways that's really strong, but it's hard to know how to grapple with something like that. I think it has to be acknowledged, but it's hard to know how to. And I think the only way to is to just keep talking to people about it and keep considering many different perspectives that I'm sure there'll be on it, and just accept that there's never going to be a simple answer to it, because we are neither children nor fascists, so there can't be.
Yeah.
To paraphrase, I think Frank Turner.
Yeah. So you mentioned gaps.
Yeah.
What have you been doing to try and fill? Obviously, no one's alive from the very early days, but some of the more recent gaps. How have you approached those?
So more recent gaps, that's just been a matter of talking to people, really, and asking them, what have you got in your own collections? Colin Judges, who does a lot of set design here, has a very impressive personal collection, and so I've gone to him and asked him for, because he's been here since the early 70s, so I've been able to go to him and go, do you know about this? Do you know about this thing? Or I've got this photo and I have no idea what it's from. Do you know where it's from? And he'll often know. There are other people as well.
Well, you need people with a comprehensive collection and a good memory.
Yeah, absolutely. There have been other people as well who I've been able to provide lists of this is what's missing, and they've been able to fill out a lot of it, and I'm very, very grateful for that. It's just a matter of trying to find the people who have the information. So it requires more socialising than you might expect.
Yep, I can see that.
Yeah.
That must be interesting too, though, hearing people's kind of stories and their memories.
Absolutely. That's one of the most kind of unexpectedly rewarding things about this all, because I didn't... So the initial plan for all the data entry archiving stuff was that people were going to get some folders of archiving materials, take them home and just work from home. That was not practical for me because I don't have a car, and we all agreed...
It was heavy.
It was heavy, and we all agreed I shouldn't be taking this stuff on the public trains. So I've been coming in to work here instead at the theatre, and I work in our members' room typically, which, if you're coming into the theatre, generally you have to go through in order to get where you're going. And so people come through and they'd see me working and they'd stop and go, oh, where are you up to? And particularly older members, or people who've been here for a long time, would see me working and go, oh, where are you up to? What are you working on? And I'd show them, and they'd recognise it because they were in it, or someone they knew was in it, or they had a story for me about it, and they'd stop and talk to me about it and tell me about that stuff. And I feel quite bad because, again, I kind of go quite heartless while I'm working, and I'd just be keeping working while they were talking to me. But I was always listening and always interested, even if I was kind of not really just typing the whole time. But it was really nice, a way for me to kind of get to know some of these people that I hadn't known very well beforehand, because they always wanted to know what I was doing, and so I would end up talking to them about it and asking about it, and that's been really wonderful. I love talking. I'm probably one of the youngest people here. I'm 23. Unless there's a secret cohort of 19-year-olds I don't know about.
No, we need some, but we need not at the moment.
Yeah, and so, these are people from very different generations to me, that I haven't always had a lot of opportunities to talk to people from that period, and I love that period. It sounds very rude. From different generations to me, and I love talking to people who are older than me. I always have, and it's great to have this way of kind of connecting about stuff and have this opportunity to talk to people, because it's so interesting. And that's one of the reasons I said at the start I didn't really feel like the university societies were right for me, and that's because I've never really got on with people who are precisely my own age, with a few exceptions. I've always liked talking to people who are very different ages to me. So, when I was 19, I didn't want to hang out with other 19-year-olds. The few friends I had thought it was very odd that I was coming to spend all my time with people who were a fair bit older than me. But I was just more excited by the idea of getting to spend time with people who are very different ages, very different life experiences. And so this has been a really great opportunity to do that. I hope when I'm that age that I'm interested in talking to 19-year-olds, I guess, or 23-year-olds as the case may be.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the great and fairly unique things about amateur theatres, really.
Yeah.
Just thinking about it. So we have a youth theatre here at the Crescent. So potentially we have members, if you include the youth theatre, from sort of the age of 12, 13, up to some, I won't name names, but people in their mid to late 80s.
Yeah.
Who are still, you know, active members.
And that's just brilliant. And I'm glad I've had a really good reason to be talking to them. It's nice.
So what's next for the digital archive? How do you see it evolving and developing in the future?
Right, so, well, I will always be updating things.
And it never stops,
Yeah,
does it? 'Cause
yeah.
everything, the show
Yeah,
we're doing in 3 weeks will need to be archived.
Yeah, and yeah, like I say, I'd like to be kind of using it to maybe do some more historical displays and stuff. I know there have been talks about us having more displays and stuff. We've got this lovely display in this walkway up at the bar that's got the whole history of it, and that's great. And I think it would be nice to do more stuff like that, because we've got all this gorgeous stuff that's just sitting in a cabinet. And otherwise, I've just got to keep. We've all just got to keep working on the photo digitization now. And again, I hopefully some of it will be going public soon. I've been saying that for months, but hopefully it will be soon. I think we're pretty close to it. There's basically just 1 or 2 more things that need to be added to the most recent years. We're doing it by decade. So
yeah,
I've been working on getting everything from the 2020s so far ready to be public. There's just a couple of things that need to be added. Talk about maybe changing a couple of things on the website. And then it should be available, and I think that'll be interesting, hopefully. Potentially more, and then right now I'm working on the 2010s, because I'm done with everything I can do on the 2020s, and after that I think I'm actually going to do the 1950s, because the 2000s intimidates me a little bit. I think there were more shows in the 2000s than any other decade. There's just so much. And so the
I mean, the
1950s
output of the theatre has increased largely over time, hasn't it? I think if you look at the early days, the number of productions per season was in single figures, certainly.
Yeah.
And yeah, that increased over time. I think now, currently we do sort of 12 to 14 shows a year. I don't know if we used to do more than that. Perhaps we did.
In 2009, I believe it was 25. So, yeah, it's just a lot.
I was a member in 2009. I do not remember these 25 shows, I have to say, but okay.
Yeah, I think that's counting some kind of like one night stuff.
Right.
Yeah. That it's just a lot.
Yeah.
And more to scan as well, because there won't be digital stuff to bring over as much. Though I'm quite looking forward to get back to it, because I don't have. When did you join? Can I ask?
2008.
Okay, so this would have been the stuff I'm thinking of.
I think January. Beginning of 2008.
Shortly before you, because I don't know if you've seen any of the posters from kind of the very end of the 90s, early 2000s, but someone discovered word art and decided
word art, yes,
and decided that is all we need to make a poster from now on. And so they're some of the most. They're kind of beautiful to me, because they're actually rather nostalgic for me to look at. Because I mean, word art was very much the thing of my childhood. I remember going to computer classes, and that was what we were being taught how to use. I remember having to make a little poster and choosing rainbow word art for the top, and being utterly devastated when I found out our printers only did black and white. It's one of my earliest formative memories. It's not. But yeah, so that's really quite delightful to me, but also I'm glad our posters don't look like that anymore.
Yeah, I too remember when word art was very exciting.
Yeah. Clip art too. It's
great. Yes, of course.
It's great. Some really, really interesting looking posters and programmes.
Well, thank you, Claire. It's been fascinating talking about the archive with you. And
good.
Really look forward to seeing some more of the work that you're doing. Tell us about your first love
with theatre. So it's hard for me to say because I'm very lucky. I come from a family where I've been going to theatre for longer than I can remember because I came from a family that was able to do that. And so it's hard for me to say what the first thing was, but I do have a slightly convoluted early memory of it that I guess might be fitting. So the thing is, I was a very literal and kind of realistic child, very practical child. My grandma, when I was 3 years old, took me to see The Snowman, like the children's story, and apparently
it's still on every year
yeah,
at the Birmingham Rep.
Yeah, yeah, I was taken to see it, and we get to the bit where the snowman, comes to life, and it's, it's a guy in a costume, and everyone, all the other kids in the audience are going like, "Oh my God, it's the snowman!" And I don't remember this, but my grandma loves the story. I apparently leaned over to her and I whispered in her ear, "Grandma, there's a man in there." So yeah, very, very literal child I was. And so a few years after that, we went to Panto. We went to Cinderella when I was 5. And I remember, I don't remember a lot about the show, but I remember it was very fun. I remember it was very sparkly and pretty, and I think I got a magic wand, which was a prized possession of my childhood. So great night all around. And on the way home, we were in the car and we pull up to a red light, and we're next to a bus shelter. And my dad looks out the window and he goes, "Oh, kids, look, it's Cinderella!" And it's Cinderella's actress. She's standing at the bus shelter, wearing a really unflattering coat and looking very much like a normal human being. And it's one of those things where something intellectually. Like as a child, I knew intellectually it's all actors. It's not real magic because, again, very literal child.
Yeah.
But I'd never been confronted with that. I knew there was a man in the snowman suit, but I'd never seen him. And this is the first time I've seen the real human and kind of put those two things together and gone like, oh my God, it really, really is just a person. But despite the fact that I know it's not magic, I'm still capable of going to it and enjoying it and enjoying the atmosphere and thinking it's beautiful and sparkly and magical. And I'm thinking, God, that's just a person. And they convinced me that it was like this. They put on this whole show that made it feel like it was so much bigger than that. But it's just a person. That's so cool. That is so cool that they were able to do that. How did they do that? And yeah, that is actually probably why you asking earlier why I like backstage more. That's probably why. Is that I was just fascinated with how they made this really normal woman seem like a magical princess. That's just cool. It's just very cool.
Lovely story. And tell us about a time when you died on stage.
So this is something that happened here a few years ago on Christmas Carol. So the way that show worked is that at the end, all the cast are coming on stage. It's like, it's oh my God, it's Christmas. It's the end of a Christmas Carol. Hooray.
Scrooge is redeemed.
Scrooge is redeemed, yes. And then they look up at the sky and a little hatch opens and snow falls down on the stage.
Yeah.
And everyone goes, oh my God, it's snowing. It's the end of the play. We get 2 bows and go get pizza. And that was how it works every night. The Christmas show works is that most days it's a matinee and an evening show. And so one of the days on the matinee, everyone's gathered to look up the snow, and it doesn't come. The hatch just hasn't opened. And so everyone's kind of looking up and they just have to go like, hey.
It's not snowing!
Yeah.
Hooray!
So everyone goes
we
off
don't
stage.
need to grid the roads.
Yeah. And so, yeah, everyone goes off stage, and then we spend the whole time that afternoon kind of going like, what happened with the snow? That's not actually happened before. The snow's been really good this whole run. Why was there no snow? And everyone's very worried about it going into the evening show, but we're just going through it until we get to the bit at the end, and everyone goes out on stage and they're waiting to see if the snow falls down. And hatch opens and massive snowfall comes out. It all comes down. It's brilliant. And everyone goes, yay! Completely sincerely, because they genuinely didn't know it was going to happen. And I just lost it backstage. There was just something about knowing that they weren't acting that just got to me. And so they're all coming off, and I'm supposed to be doing my backstage stuff, but I just can't. I'm just crying laughing because it's just so funny to me. So yeah,
You should have kept them in suspense for every performance.
Yeah.
We're not sure if it's going to work tonight, guys. It's going to be playing up.
They should, yeah. It was the most genuine thing that happened that entire run on that stage. But yeah, that's a fun memory.
Oh, brilliant. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for talking to us, Claire. It's been really, really interesting.
Oh, good.
Inspired by our conversation with Clare Crosland, Phil's been delving into the Crescent archives to find out a bit more about the first 2 shows of the Crescent centenary season. Both are revivals of classic plays which the company has performed before. First up, opening in the Ron Barber studio on 16th of September and running until the 24th, is Noel Coward's witty supernatural comedy Blithe Spirit. Phil, what did you find about the past history of Crescent productions of Blithe?
Blithe Spirit is actually a very popular play which has been repeatedly performed by the Crescent, 1959, 1979, 2005. The really interesting thing about that is that it was performed in every single one of the Crescent buildings. The second thing, which is more pertinent to an oncoming production, is that in 1979 the production assistant was Colin Simmons. Colin will be directing Othello, which will be performed November this year.
Fantastic to see how long-standing members run through the Crescent's history. Then, opening on 24th of September and running until the 30th, is a stage adaptation of Jane Austen's timeless romantic comedy Pride and Prejudice. What did you find about the times the Crescent's done that one before?
Pride and Prejudice has been produced twice previously by the Crescent. In 1994, a standard indoor show, it featured 3 members of the company who are still very much active in the theatre and are actually directing this season's plays. Michael Barry, Charlie's Aunt, Fee Cotton, Educating Rita, and Colin Judge's Blithe Spirit, as we've just discussed. The second and more recent production was in 2012 and was both a studio production and then an outdoor summer tour. This is a pattern that we continually repeat and which has proved very successful.
Thanks, Phil. Great to hear about how so many of our current members run through the Crescent's rich history. Thank you for listening to the Amateur of Life and Death podcast. If you'd like to listen to more, make sure you subscribe at podcast.crescent-theatre.co.uk or via Spotify or Apple Podcasts to get the next episode.
You can find out more about the Crescent Theatre Birmingham and our upcoming productions, including Blithe Spirit and Pride and Prejudice, by visiting www.crescent-theatre.co.uk or by following us on social media.
Amateur of Life and Death is a Crescent Theatre production. This episode was researched and presented by Phil Ree and Liz Plumpton. The music is by Brendan Stanley and the podcast is edited by Kevin Middleton.